everyone, and welcome to Rainbow Space Magic 2.0. This is the Fandom and Fanfiction panel. To start, each of us panelists shall introduce ourselves and a bit about our fandom background. I'll start since I'm already talking anyway. I'm Dorian Graves, and my pronouns are they, them, and I've been writing fanfic since I was 11. I mostly wrote about my favorite video games back on oldfanfiction.net, and I accidentally discovered my queer identity in the process. Oops. Nowadays, I write weird and queer speculative fiction books like the Deadly Drink series, and my fanfics are now over on AO3. Pleased to meet you. And whoever would like to go next can go ahead and go next.
I don't want to follow that. You're awesome. So we're silent over here. Go ahead if you want to, Kim. Or
go ahead.
Okay. I'm Christine Wright. Yeah, I've been writing fan fiction since before I even knew it was called fan fiction. I was probably 9 or 10. Started off with Star Wars, Star Trek, the original stuff. I won't even talk about the new stuff, but anyway. But nowadays my fan fiction is a little harder core, and it's Sherlock lately, Good Omens, and let's see, and Doctor Who. I also have a book series out, Made It to the Captain.
So I guess I'll go next. Hi, I'm Kim Fielding. I started writing fan fiction maybe 15 years ago. My fandom was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I wrote something like 125 / spike fictions that are up on AO3. They're still there. I haven't written, I've moved over into writing primarily original fiction. Nowadays, I get my enjoyment by just reminding my daughters who are 18 and 21 that I wrote fan fiction, which they both find horrifying. So that's wonderful.
Are we up to me? So I'm Kristen, or KL Noone, which is how I publish. I'm published with JMS Books. I've been writing fanfic since, oh gosh, when was season 4 of Supernatural? It's been a while. What was that, 2008? So I started with Supernatural, kind of fell into X-Men fandom after first class, and then fell very, very hard into the MCU, and have written a lot of MCU things, and done some fan fests and participation in things, and run a couple of fan events. And these days I'm writing a little less fanfic, but a lot more original fic. But all of my fanfic is still up on AO3, and you can find me over there or on Dreamwidth. And I've also worked in some fandom studies into my academic life as well.
Excellent. That is delightful. I suppose I should probably also cop to my fan fictions. I started in Final Fantasy and Mega Man X, of all things.
Wow.
And then nowadays, I mostly write for other video games like Fire Emblem and One Piece. All right. Let's get to some questions. Let me scroll down to actually read some questions. All right, so clearly all of us have been reading and writing fanfic for quite a while. Why did we start reading and writing fan fiction, and what does it offer that differs from or adds to traditional fiction and IP?
I'll start this time because I hate silence. So I fell into it accidentally. I think I heard like an NPR thing about fan fiction or something. I mean, it was something I heard on the radio or something, and I had been feeling kind of frustrated with published fiction in a lot of ways. And at the time, I was also doing a rewatch of the entire Buffy series, and so I heard this thing and I thought, I wonder if there's fan fiction about Buffy. And I started reading it, and I was really pleasantly shocked by the quality of the stories. Going into it, I guess I thought, oh, it's going to be horrible, but I mean, this was professional quality writing, and it sort of sucked me in, and it was fun, but it also explored things that, I wasn't finding in mainstream fiction at the time, and allowed me to start dabbling my own toes in a way that felt really comfortable to me.
Mhm. Indeed. For me, so I'm an ex-mountain hermit, like I've literally raised coyotes. And I also I read above my reading level very quickly. So when I was 11, apparently Katie withdrew. So unfortunately, she will not be joining us today. Wanted to quickly add that. Sorry, everyone. So in the mountains, I had gotten through all of my middle grade and YA books, but I wasn't quite mature enough for adult fiction. So it's like, well, what do I read? What? I could read about my favorite characters on the internet? Fanfiction.net works on dial up? Whoo, boy. And what I discovered is, in the mountains, it's really hard to find queer representation. I think I had a single book that was mildly traumatizing, but then there's suddenly all these, not only all my favorite characters, but they can love each other in a way that they don't get to in the original work, especially because a lot of video games, at least at the time, didn't have time to focus on romance. So it was very, very exciting to explore. And I just kept reading it because you know what? They could not take me away from my computer.
I guess I kind of just started as a kid. I loved to write stories anyway, and fell in love with the characters. I never read fan fiction until I was an adult because honestly, I was a kid before computers. They had just come out and it was, the lovely chunky computers on the desk and green screens and all that. So I did not have fan fiction to read until I was an adult. But as a kid, I just love those characters and I wanted the stories to be slightly different. Like you said, it wasn't, I was 9 or 10 or whatever. It wasn't the relationship necessarily that I was going for, but it was like friendships and different adventures that I started with. And I don't remember the second part of that question.
Like you, Christine, I think it was that sense of looking for more and more about the characters and more about this thing that I really loved. I suppose I was actually writing bad Star Wars fanfic when I was a kid, handwritten in a little journal with the kitty on the cover that no one's ever seen. But having that same feeling of falling in love with Supernatural, we can talk about falling out of love with Supernatural also if you want. But then just wanting more of it, wanting to talk to people about it and being so excited. And then look, there's a whole bunch of people also getting excited about it. And we're writing more things about these characters. And we're all here because we love the show and the characters. And also initially for me, it wasn't necessarily romantic even. There are people writing case fic, right, or monster of the week things. But there was more of it. And then there was wonderful hurt comfort fic, right, where they had emotions about each other. And it was this great emotional catharsis. And it felt like both coming home and getting inspired to start writing more for me.
Or when the authors take those minor characters and just give them a whole character study and development, and you're like, ah. Or they go into an AU that develops more about your favorite characters, and you're like, I'm so happy.
And some of it was so well done. There's some great early Supernatural fanfics, again, that did folklore and all these really in-depth things, and folklore that wasn't showing up on the show, from other cultures and other places. It's like, this is so cool.
Yeah. I think you brought up something really interesting, KL, is that the same thing happened in Sherlock where there was the last season and then there was a lot of hatred towards the show. And I think that I didn't want to get involved at the time. I had loved it up to that point, and then all of a sudden in the fandom just blew up. And it was either you loved it, and if you did love it, everybody hated you. So I think you're right. I think that there comes a point in a lot of fandoms that, if the show does something or the writers do something for the show, that people just kind of fall out of it. And I noticed that Sherlock, the fandom really just, for a while, there was a lot of hatred towards our fan fiction because we still love the show, but then all of a sudden everybody started writing fix it fan fiction.
Yes.
Which was nice.
Oh, the power of fix it fic.
Oh yes.
There were so many of those in X-Men fandom, especially after First Class killed off the one character who should have been unkillable, because that was literally his power. Like, no, Darwin's not dead.
Right.
Indeed. I know with me, since I wrote for a bunch of video games when I was younger, since there were video games meant for children, there were quite a few plot holes. So in a lot of those game fandoms, a lot of the fix-it fic was trying to wrangle everything into a coherent timeline, going, okay, but if this character is over here and then died and then reappears over here, what happened in between? And I'm going to use this to lead into one of our other questions, which is, how has fan fiction affected our writing process? And for me, it definitely, doing all of those fix-it fics, trying to wrangle the plot into order while putting your own spin on it, definitely has helped me with being able to wrangle a really tight plot together and keeping an eye out for plot holes. Because I knew if there was a single plot hole in my fanfic, when I was trying to fix all the other plot holes, the reviewers knew. The reviewers would tell me.
And I'd say things like character voice too, because if you write a character wrong, your readers will let you know.
Oh, they'll tell you. Yeah. Yeah. How did it change my process? I think it helped me develop my process, helped me, like you said, develop plot, to work on characters. Because they hand you characters that you already love. I found it easier then to understand how to develop dialogue, and events and situations that were important. Because as a kid, you write like, they went to dinner and they ordered spaghetti. I mean, that's how you write as a kid. And then as you read it or as you learn, you drop the unimportant events, you drop all that stuff. He walked to the store, who cares? So I think that helped me like hone certain skills.
For me, I think a really big part of what fan fiction did for me was it gave me a community. I'd never had a writing community before. And, it meant when I wrote something, I could get feedback right away, which was really great. But I also met other people who were authors and they've stayed my friends. My beloved editor, how I met her was through fanfic, and we became friends. She sent me a very nice email, and she'd read a couple of my stories and said, do you mind if I edit it? And I'm like, yes, please. And she's she's a professional editor, and now she edits everything I write. And so I found this connection to people that I would have had a really hard time finding otherwise. And so that was really important to me.
I'd say the encouragement too, as you said, that sense of community. I remember being so afraid to post my first fic way back when. And it was one of those things where someone who was a big name fan in the fandom had thrown out a bunch of prompt ideas like, I would love to read this, but I don't have time to write it. And I'd had some thoughts about that. So I went, well, I could try to write it. Maybe she'll like it. And so I posted it, and I was so nervous. And she actually went and commented on it, and then got very excited because someone had written her prompt, and it was so welcoming. And that was one of those things that, she was a very big name fan in the fandom, and I was nobody. I was lurking, and she didn't have to go and read it and praise it, but she made a point out of it, and it was so welcoming. And I've always remembered that. Like, I try to be nice to new fans too, because it meant so much for me posting my first ever fic and being so nervous about it.
And those kudos.
Yeah. Those emails are awfully nice.
It was, part of it too wasn't just other people's. I mean, it's great to have other people's, to realize other people can enjoy what you're reading, but to realize I could do it, I'd been writing short stories since I was a kid, but I had this idea in my head that I couldn't write a novel. I don't know. It just seemed like this Herculean task. And my first fan fiction was like 100,000 words. And I'm like, you know, I bet you I could write a novel, you know. So
if I did this.
yeah, there it is. And so it not only gave me feedback from other people, but from myself, you know, to know, hey, this is something I can do.
Yeah, mine was much the same way. I'd been writing fan fiction for years, but my goal had always been, I want to write for video games since I wrote video game fan fiction. And one day I was talking to one of my teachers, and he's like, well, why don't you just write books? Because you're already kind of doing that anyway. I'm just like, oh, I have an idea there. I could just write books because I'm basically doing that.
I don't know though. Has anybody ever had that where a character just takes over your life? I don't know about you, but Sherlock just completely took over my life, and I wrote like 100,000 words of fan fiction.
I am in the middle of that right now because apparently whenever I publish a book, my brain has to go, okay, we are going to go into fanfic mode now before we can get back to original fiction. So for the past 2 weeks, my brain has been, okay, you're going to hyper focus on this fandom and you're going to write redemption fic for these villain characters. And I'm like, okay, this is what we're doing. All right, let's go.
I still have a thing for Spike. I have a little Spike doll. And he travels with me, and he's been to, I think, 20 something countries now. He has his own little passport. and he's still like, you know, he's still my number one, you know.
As well he should be.
He should be. I've gotten some pretty strange looks from like security people when they find a little plastic vampire in my purse or something, but you know. Or when I'm taking pictures someplace and people, but actually that's a good point. When I've been places all over the world and I'm sitting there taking pictures with, and people will come up and they recognize Spike, and you know, who knows where they're from, but they recognize Spike. And I have this conversation with somebody in, you know, Vienna or Reykjavik or somewhere, you know, and that's really cool.
Yeah, that's so cool, isn't it? I do like that because I was traveling through Great Britain, and I have my little Sherlock stuff with me because of course you do, right? And yeah, they're like, oh, that's Sherlock. Oh, and so it opens up so much.
Indeed, that sense of like just connection and community with people, like even if they don't know you for your books or who you are as a person, you just find that instant shared connection of, you like that thing, I like that thing, what is happening? I've been like, when I was getting into college, part of my college interview was me and my interviewer discovering we were both fans of a certain book series and going, oh yes, I see you are also a being of taste. Wonderful. Let's talk about our headcanons. Oh, okay,
Yes.
we should also talk about the college, but headcanons first.
Yes.
When I got hired at my college and I came in to do all the hiring paperwork, the HR person had what was clearly a fan-made Sherlock mug on her desk, and it was John Sherlock holding hands. It was her coffee mug, and I looked at it for a minute, and I kind of looked at her. And,
you want me? Hire me.
Yeah, and we started talking as she was doing my paperwork, and we asked what I got hired to teach, and I was talking about teaching pop culture and things. And it's like, and I do some fan studies work, and we did this very cautious, like, okay, you're in fandom, I'm in fandom. Okay, let's be excited. And we spent that whole like HR paperwork afternoon just being excited about fandom. It was great.
That is delightful. All right, moving on to some of the other questions. I'm curious to know, how has fanfic and fandom influenced our own exploration of our identities and sexualities? I mentioned a little bit earlier that for me, I kind of started discovering the fact that I was queer from fan fiction because I saw, oh wait, hold on, you can like someone that isn't the opposite gender? Wait, hold on, you don't have to be the gender you were born with? You don't need a gender at all? No one ever told me this. Oh. And for some of it, I just started writing it like, I just think it's neat. I'm just going to write this because I think it's cool to explore. And then it's just, after doing that enough, I'm like, wait a minute, hold on, that is me. I am just reflecting myself in my favorite characters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we got this.
Yeah, so I already had come out before I really started writing as an adult and posting on AO3, but I found that I was a lot of people look at me and go, "Oh, you're so innocent and sweet," and I'm like, "Oh, you don't know, you don't know," and so I allowed that side of myself to explore, um, sharing about myself, but as a character, I could go, "Hey, I'm really into the BDSM, and here is what I know." And so, I love making Sherlock the sub. Okay, he needed to be the sub, and John needed to be his dom. But I was allowed finally to be free and saying, "This is what I know about it, and this is what I want to write about it." In a safe way that I could come out in that fashion as a writer.
Having other people around who say, "Oh, this is neat. Tell me more about this." Or here's some resources for this. Like that sense of community. I mean, I think I've been sort of slowly working on coming out as bi for a while, since high school, probably. But it's one of those things where you don't have the terms necessarily or the vocabulary, or you don't maybe know other people, so you don't really have anyone to talk to. But then suddenly, here's all these people who will talk about it with you. And they have the terms and the words, and they can say, "Oh, have you looked at this resource?" Or "You should go talk to this person." And there's this whole world that opens up for you, for other people who are like you or can understand what you're thinking. And then if you're me, you go, "Oh, this feels so much better. I am bi, and I can start to say that to people." And then you get more comfortable saying it in other spaces slowly again. It's been a slow process on this end, but it was one of the first spaces where I came out to people, I think.
Mm.
Mhm. I think it also helps with understanding other people. Like when I
Mhm.
started college, I started meeting people who were transgender and non-binary for the first time. But because I'd already been experiencing that in fan fiction, I could, when someone said, "Oh yeah, I'm trans. I was born this and now I am this," I could be like, "Oh, like this character in this fanfic I read.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it. I understand. Cool."
Mhm.
Now, doesn't mean that fan fiction was always accurate to real life, but at least you get the idea in there to go, "Oh, okay, I got it. This all makes sense. I've seen this before."
Mhm.
Not just exposure, but I think also it normalizes a lot of things that tend to be depicted in a lot of ways as being very, either made the butts of jokes or depicted as being extreme, or we just don't have, I didn't have a lot of exposure to. I'm an academic. I have my academic ivory tower, and I'm in a pretty conservative small town in California. And so to see all sorts of different things treated as just, in a much more open, positive thing was a really good experience for me, as it continues to be.
And people
Yeah,
being
and
open
as
and
we
positive
normalize it,
about sex too.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to talk about sex and sexuality so freely. That was such a fantastic thing to find.
Until you read it out loud yourself, and then it's like, oh, to a group. It's like, I wrote that. Oh God.
or until you're on until you're on the shared computer and your brother, who is also reading the same fandom as you,
Mm.
sees one that you've clicked because the link's a different color on your old computer, and then goes, "Hey, what are you reading?
Yeah.
Don't judge me. Why are you reading that pairing? That pairing is valid. Excuse me." And then you end up in a fandom war with your brother for like 5 hours.
Oh no, worse. My daughter came home. She was 20, 22. So we had started talking about fandoms, and she said, "Oh, I read, Sherlock," and I'm like, oh Lord. And I said, I do too. And I write it. And she goes, really? Who are you? And she looked it up. She goes, Mom, I've read this. I'm like, oh Lord.
My daughters have both written fanfic, but in different fandoms. I don't even ask. We have sort of a don't ask, don't tell, because none of us want to read anything anybody else has written. So we have our own corners, and I think that's comfortable for all of us.
One of the jokingly scariest moments I had is, as I mentioned, I've been writing and posting fanfics since I was 11, and I've moved on from a lot of my stuff. And one day my brother messages me and goes, I found your old account. But no, I thought I deleted it. I am saving your fanfic. No. Oh gosh, what was my login? Quick, delete the bad stuff. What did you write here? Weren't you like 13? It's not there anymore. You can't prove it existed.
Oh man.
I suppose mine went a little bit the other direction because my dad was apparently very active in Star Trek fandom, and he had a bunch of the Sandra Marshak, like the Star Trek New Voyages stuff, and the Jean Laura early things, none of which I realized until I found them like hanging out on a bookshelf. And we still haven't really talked about it, but apparently my dad had a bunch of the like early 60s, 70s Star Trek fanfic. And I feel like that might be a really weird conversation to have.
Especially if it's /fic.
Yeah,
But the cool thing is my daughter, because I guess in my profile or something I said I was bi, and she actually came out that night. She said, Mom, I read that you're bi, and guess what? So am I. So that was pretty cool. That was a cool moment. I know.
That's so sweet. All right, so I think we are about halfway through the panel already, which is it doesn't feel like it's been any time at all, but I suppose we can open the floor to audience questions. Do we have anything in Q&A yet? Nope. So all of you in the audience, if you have any burning, exciting questions about the world of fanfic and fandom, feel free to post it in the Q&A section. Otherwise, we'll probably just keep talking about fandom questions, or I can go through a couple of these other questions we came up with in the meantime. Let's see. I think we've actually gone through most of the questions we came up with. I suppose one question that we haven't covered yet. Oh, we can take our time. That's nice. Cool. Talk about fanfic for 5 hours. So I guess one of the other questions we had is what some downsides of fanfic and fandom might be. I myself don't have many other than...
Oh, it's the comments you can get. Ooh.
But in a weird way, the trolls are how I first got used to constructive criticism, because there was one particular troll that no other author could stand. But in all of his insults, he had a couple nuggets of truth in there that I was like, you're right. I did mess up those character names in my first chapter. But you have to be so
well, if you're constructive, yeah.
The other thing that I know fanfic is messed up with me is tenses. Normally, I'm fine with tenses. But when I write fanfic, I like to write in I like to write in present tense.
Yeah.
So whenever I'm writing in fanfic, my ability to keep tenses in track goes out the window, and I go present, past, present tense, present, future.
Yeah. I think the only downside for me. Oh, sorry. I'm just gonna be quick. I think the real downside for me is the trolling. You can get some really nasty trolls on there. But also there's a whole thing on AO3 about tag wars, and I'm like, I'm not interested in getting into it, but you know what I mean. The whole new thing is authors are kind of fighting back against tags, and now the rebellion is to write your whole story in tags. I'm like, this is getting silly. But or the fandom wars, I mean the ship wars, oh, you don't believe in Molly and Sherlock. I'm like, I'll write Molly and Sherlock. I don't care. I write this other thing. But yeah, that's the downside for me.
or when you write rare pair and you're the only one writing your rare pair, and you're like, well,
Yes.
I guess
And nobody believes in you.
I will have to feed myself. Or you ship one particular ship, but your interpretation of them is different
Yes.
from normal. Kind of like as one of you mentioned earlier with having Sherlock as a sub and John as a dom, and then give everyone be like, what are you doing? And you're like, the truth. I am
Yes.
living my truth. Excuse me.
I'm living my truth. Yes.
I wrote
All
something
right.
once where my fic was the third fic ever posted for that pairing, but it
Oh,
was also
wow.
fantastic because there was no accepted canon for anything. So write what you want.
Mm-hmm.
I've been really lucky in that I've been able to avoid, all fandoms have those meltdowns over whatever, and
Mm,
I think if you, for the most part, if you want to avoid those, you can, and so I've
yeah.
been pretty lucky about that, and I never had much experience with trolling or anything, but I actually had a very funny experience when I was first writing fanfic. I was writing it a lot, and I didn't tell anybody, and I'd go off into the study and I'd be typing away, and I found out several years later, after I told my husband what I'd been doing, that he thought I was having an online affair. Because I was
Yes.
spending all this time off in this room by myself on the computer, and he never said anything to me at the time.
My ex
So
did the same thing. Oh my God. That's why he's X. Okay, X. But
yeah, so we're still married. We've been married a really long time. So I wish he would have
that's
said
funny
something at the
though.
time, but I was really hesitant to tell him what I was doing. And when I finally did, he was so relieved that all I was doing was writing fan fiction that he was like, "Oh, that's great."
That's, oh my gosh. That
Oh, I do have one other sort of larger negative, and I won't say which story it was, but I had a story of mine read on a talk show to the actors, and it was nobody ever contacted me. There was no permission or anything involved. I found out about it because people started sending me links and saying, "Have you seen this?" And it
mm,
was horrifying. And that was one of the worst things. And this is also kind of answering a question that just popped up about fandom life in real life. But that
mhm.
was one of the worst feelings because they were mocking it, right? They were taking it and reading it and laughing at the fanfic. And even worse, it was something I'd written as a gift for someone else
Oh
for, a
no.
prompt of that person's. And I mean, I felt sickened by it. Like it was this
Yeah.
weird violation of something that I had created, and they were using it for laughs. And not
Yeah.
everyone felt that way. Obviously, there were other people saying, "You must have felt so great about this. The actors know about your work. Like, someone found your
No,
story and read it." I was
didn't
like,
you?
no, this is awful. Like, it was
Yeah.
terrible. I still get people popping by every once in a while to say, "You wrote that story that they read on that show."
Oh God.
So
Yes.
sad.
Yeah, that would be devastating. I'm sorry that happened. That's like it needs to stay private. I'm always afraid because I live in a very conservative place, that it's gonna be found out because I can actually be fired over being bi, which is really stupid. But it's written from my heart, and for someone to do something like that, that would be devastating. To take it and then mock it, and then they're the ones that you love are mocking it. I would just be like, scratch my eyes out.
Mm-hmm.
It was really even worse because it had been a present for someone else and it was a
Oh
prompt,
my,
that they had given
been
me. So it
given,
was their
yeah,
prompt and their idea. And it was like,
oh
now you're
gosh,
mocking both me and my friend.
yeah,
That's so
yeah.
sad. Looks like we have a lot of
Ooh, a lot of
questions
questions all of a
coming
sudden.
up. Let's see. Let's see. Have any of your original fiction stories been inspired by your fanfic? Uh, I'll go ahead and start. So, I did not plan to have my fiction be inspired by fanfic. But one day I was looking at my books, the Deadly Drink series, and I was looking at some of my old fanfic with my OCs, and I'm like, hold on. Grumpy, cursed older brother who is definitely not cis. Younger brother who is magic, has another being living inside of him and a weirdly hollow body. They have the same I just I just made my old OCs again. And I call up my brother. I'm like, bro, I recreated my old OCs in my book, and my book has been out for 2 years, and I only just realized this. And he's like,
Yes.
I remember those OCs.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that is them. You did it. And you're going to keep doing it in all your books, aren't
Yeah.
you?
Yes.
Yeah. I like that dynamic. Leave me alone.
Yeah, accidentally I've done that. Like you, I realized that my characters have some of the same quirks as my characters do now, and I'm like, wait a minute. All my characters do this and this and this, and they first did it in fan fiction. I guess it's just something I like for my characters to do. But yeah, I mean, it's not as much as me, and I know that was one of the questions is, have you ever changed it over to just change the names and things? No, it's not that kind of bleed over. For me, it was just accidental. And I was reading back like you, Dorian, and going, hold on.
Oops, I did it again.
Yeah, I like the name Quinn has shown up like 3 times in my fan fiction and now my books. I was like, oh, wait, I must have liked that name.
Mm-hmm.
I've never done the change the name thing, but I've had something where I've had an idea that I originally thought would be fanfic, but then it was such a good idea, and then I had ideas about world building and expanding, especially for fantasy things, that I decided, well, really, I want to write so much of this, and I want it to be my world and my space for this, so it turns into original at that point. And of course, the Character Bleed trilogy started as a one single scene out of a fic I was never going to write for an MCU fic, where I wrote one scene of it, and then I was like, I don't have the time to do this. It would be enormous. It would be epic. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. So then I just decided if I'm going to do it, it's going to be an original thing. And then it became a 250,000 word trilogy. So that was fun.
The closest I've come was when I was still writing fanfic. I had this very vivid dream, which I don't do. A very vivid dream with this particular scene, and when I woke up, I thought, oh, I could make that into an AU fanfic. So I did, and then sometime later, after I was starting to write original fiction, I thought, it wasn't really fanfic to begin with. It was kind of me forcing my own scenario into the fandom, and so that particular story, I pulled it back to where it probably should have been to begin with, into the more real outside the fandom world. But that's, I think, the only time I've had that kind of crossover.
I've definitely had those where I'm coming up with AUs and I'm like, I'm putting so much work into this. I should probably just make this a original thing. Let's see. Have you disguised any fan fiction characters as original characters, which I think we sort of touched upon, but I definitely have more than a few characters that initially began life as a fan fiction character. And if anyone finds my old fan fiction or
We're looking
DeviantArt
for it
account,
now.
they will find them, and I live in small terror of that day.
We're gonna find it now.
Well, as Kels knows, because they've read pieces of that very first fic, the Character Bleed, Colby and Jason started very, very early on as certain MCU characters, and if you know what I write, you can probably guess. We can talk a lot about Steve Rogers and the muscles.
Everyone can talk about Steve Rogers' muscles. Let's not lie to ourselves.
I don't think I have any fandom characters who got resurrected as OC characters, but I do occasionally drop the fandom into my stories. I mean, I think it's kind of fun if there's a reference to the fandom in a story, if it's appropriate. So every now and then I've done that.
Delightful.
I don't think I've ever really taken a character from there, but they seem similar sometimes, but I've never deliberately moved one over. Now, there was a question about us. Would you, or what do you think of people who do that, like the fan fiction that became very famous? I'm at a dilemma because, yes, I have written a very long, very detailed fan fiction, and I've thought about it, but it'd be so hard because there's so much of the characters in that world. I mean, how would you turn it and make it mostly your own once it's all finished?
Mhm.
But I've thought about it. It's a lot of work and effort we put into these.
Indeed. Let's see. Next question. In the world where cancel culture is so prominent, how do you handle the pressure? Hmm.
I've faced no cancel culture pressure in fandom, more so in original fiction. So I think it's easier to ignore in fandom anyway. But in original fiction, you're publishing something, it's out there for the whole world to find, and they're not necessarily self-selecting about what they're looking at. And so I haven't had a problem with it in fandom.
Yeah, I think it's mostly an issue in like certain particular large fandoms. Like I remember back on Tumblr in college seeing some of the like proto cancel culture sweeping through some of the fandoms, but I never got in the way of that because I never wrote for fandoms big enough. So it was mostly going, oh, there go the super Hulocks. Oh, there go the Homestucks.
Yes.
There go this Rise of the Brave Tangled What? What?
Yeah, I think I've mostly just tried to stay out of those things as they happen. Just let people be people over there and write what I want to write. And I think I've been lucky enough to, I teach somewhere and in a field where doing things like fan studies is exciting. Like my dean knows that I write romance, and I think she knows I write fanfic, although I don't think she's read it. If she has, I don't want to know. But she knows that I have published some academic work on fandom and things like that. She's very excited. And so I feel like it hasn't actually been that much of a problem, but I think I'm lucky to be at an institution where when you say things like that, they go, oh, that's neat. And that's not true for everyone.
I literally got away with writing fan fiction for 2 of my final papers and classes in college. It was great of like, so just do an interpretive piece, however you'd like, on Shakespeare. All right, I'm going to write an urban fantasy AU crossover fanfic of Shakespeare. You're welcome, everybody.
Gotta read that. That sounds cool.
I need to find where it went.
I've given some of my Shakespeare students an option. They could write a normal essay, but they could write a creative retelling of a scene from a Shakespeare play, like tell your version of this, or tell Lavinia's version from Titus Andronicus or something, but write your version of this. And a lot of them do it, and they're always so much fun.
Mm-hmm. All right, next up. Have you ever had your fanfics plagiarized? I haven't, but I did have a really weird one where, okay, so I'm 13. I decide I'm going to write a super edgelord fanfic where it's like, what if this sweet, adorable character was the Grim Reaper? And I wrote this whole fanfic, and it was very silly. And someone thought it was the greatest idea ever and wrote a sequel for it in all caps. It was amazing. I'm just like, well, you took my idea seriously and you ran with it. Oh, and now it's a crossover. And you have the sweet innocent fandom character fighting Goku as the Grim Reaper. What are you doing? You go, buddy, you go. So I think that's the closest thing I was very collaborative at the time too. So if anyone actually ever wanted to do anything with or like my fanfics, I was like, oh yeah, no, you can go use my OC. Like, just don't write them OOC too badly, but go ahead, have fun.
Yeah, I had one that I found on Amazon one time. Well, someone else alerted me. They're like, I've read this as a fan fiction before. And they did. They took my Sherlock and just turned it in another book, just barely changed the names, made it a guy and a girl, and then had it on. And I was like, oh my God, you didn't even, like, there's a few misspellings in my fan fiction that I just don't, I'm sorry, I just don't really bother with it. And the same mistakes were in the book. And I'm like, come on, does that not tell you something? And so, but it was easy. Amazon went, okay, it's not theirs to sell, and took it down. But yeah, that was like, oh no, like multiple days of just crying. I think I may have talked to Scott about it, but yeah, just multiple days of crying because I was like, oh, Amazon won't do anything, but they did.
It's such an awful feeling. Someone took something that you poured your heart into and created, and then they just put it up there and were trying to profit from it.
Yeah.
I had someone on AO3 who was essentially copying one of my fics word for word, and it was bizarre. I don't know how they thought they wouldn't be caught.
Yeah.
They were, like, multiple people came to tell me about it. And it was almost line for line, like they were changing one or two words, like they'd changed the verb, but it was clearly my sentence. And it was one of those things where I still don't know what they thought they'd get out of it, but we reported it, and the AO3 team took it down. But it was a very strange, like, is it flattery? Like, it was a very popular story of mine. You just really wanted it? Yeah. I do love writing with other people. I collaborate a lot.
Right.
So if you want to write with me, come ask.
Right.
Well, I've never been popular enough to be plagiarized, I guess, or so. I don't know about it, so ignorance is bliss.
You might not know about it because
Yeah.
honestly, I think almost everybody's gets, either moved or kept or sent to somebody else, and then they're just somebody else posts it. It just gets a little weird because, especially on AO3, you can download the whole thing, and there it is. It's yours, and you can mess with it. I'm like, oh. But
Right. That reminds me, did anyone ever see that when Great Gatsby went public domain, someone uploaded the entirety of the Great Gatsby to AO3, and the only difference is they added a scene where Gatsby kisses another man, and that's the only difference.
No. Oh my God. Seriously? Oh God.
So funny.
Oh wow. Wow.
How many of my students will go and find that version and believe it's the real thing?
Yes.
They may be disappointed.
Right?
Actually, I sort of hope they do.
I always knew they kissed. I just didn't have the right copy of the book.
Aha, we did it.
I'm always shocked by what plagiarists think they can get away with. This has nothing to do with my fan fiction, but I had a student once on an exam plagiarize from the textbook, which would be bad enough, except I wrote the textbook. And how they thought I wasn't going to notice that just mystified me. So
oh my God, how?
Yeah, it's like, wow, this is really well written and insightful. Yeah.
I'm impressed with you. Wow.
All right. Looks like we have a couple other questions that ended up in the general chat. One, how do you feel about folks publishing fanfic AUs with different names, like how 50 Shades was Twilight fanfic, but there are better books that started as fanfics I just can't remember the names of? Oh, like Naomi Novak's Temeraire series, which I love the heck out of. It was originally a Master Servant AU where they added dragons. Look, if you could take your original fiction, if you could take your fanfics and spin them into original fictions, more power to you. Especially because I think nowadays there's more of a cry for books that read like fan fiction.
Yes. Yeah.
And the amount of effort that goes into fan fiction is often equal to the amount of effort that goes into original fiction, sometimes more. So it's not I don't know, laziness or something. And I mean, obviously there's a long history of authors recycling other people's stories.
Well, even famous authors do it. So
yeah, so that's nothing. It's nothing new. And if you're bringing your own ideas to it, I don't think I don't have a problem with it.
And I was trained as a medievalist, and we could talk about collaborative authorship and John Lydgate saying in the 13th century, here's my book. Go ahead and write your version if you think you can do it better.
Right.
So that's a very, very old and well-worn tradition.
Hello, this is my King Arthur fanfic with my OC Lancelot. He's such a cool knight, you guys.
Oh my goodness, I've written King Arthur too. I forgot. That was really early in my life.
I have a friend who's writing the most beautiful Celtic take on King Arthur ever, and I'm like, please finish writing this so I can shove it in everyone's face. Thank you. Let's see. We could briefly talk about this question earlier, but have any of you had an incident of your fandom life bleeding into your real life in a bad way? Mine is mostly just if people happen to bring up one of those very specific video games I wrote fanfic for, and I'm like, hold on, my encyclopedic knowledge demands that I answer this to my own self-embarrassment. And then everyone's like, okay, how do you know this much about Sonic the Hedgehog? And I go,
Right?
do not ask that question. Please
I
do
know
not
his
ask that question. I
background.
was 12 and I didn't know what I was doing. Oh, I did also once find and review a fanfic. Like, it was a newer author, and I was like, I'm gonna help and give them some pointers. And then I found out it was one of my friend's little sisters writing her first fanfic. I'm like, don't tell her that was my pen name. Don't let her know it was
Don't
me.
tell her.
I've
Oh
had
my
actually a
goodness.
sort of a good effect a couple of times when I was talking to someone who I knew through my original fiction, and we start chatting, and we found out, as it happened at least twice, we found out we had known each other in fandom through our fandom names, and that was really fun, oh, I know you.
I know who you are.
so that was fun.
Yeah.
I was doing an academic conference on Supernatural a couple years back, one of the DePaul pop culture conferences, and a bunch of us were just chatting afterwards, and it kind of came around to fan fiction, and we cautiously were sharing, author names and things, and two people were like, "That's you?" And I was like,
Oh
"Oh."
my gosh.
But it was briefly a little weird too, because there's like that moment of like, "Oh, you wrote that thing that I love, and then how do you talk about this?" I'm like, "No, just keep talking." So there's that little moment of awkwardness, like if you've written something that's really well known and then suddenly people get slightly awed by it.
Yeah.
But then
And
you
then
just,
they're fans of you. And then you're like, oh my God.
I had people do fan art and a little bit of fanfic based on some of my original writing, which is the coolest feeling ever. Like it's a coming full circle thing. Like I am a fandom on AO3 now.
Right?
I think my fanfics have gotten more fan art than my original fic books have. And I just realized that, and I don't know what I think about it.
Probably nothing makes me happier than fan art, whether it's original fic or fanfic. I mean, it just makes my month, like fan art.
You wrote something that made someone else want to create something.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
And it's especially cool because I can't even manage like stick figures. So when somebody else can be so creative and something that was my story, it's really great.
Sometimes get the messages like, can I do fan art for this? Or can I, write fanfic for this? Just like, yes, oh my God, I'm so honored. Like it's an honor for me to have inspired you to make something that didn't exist before. Like you're going to go create something because of something I made. And it's just the best feeling.
I had someone do a cosplay of one of my characters from Mated to the Captain. And I was like, you're doing what? And she goes, yeah, I want to do a cosplay of your character. What color hair? What color this? And what does the uniform look like? I'm like, oh my God. I'm like bawling. Like, this is so, you don't understand.
It's amazing. Even on a smaller level of creation, even the people who do the really in-depth reviews where they're like, oh, I
Oh,
noticed
yes.
this and this in your fic, and you did this and this, and wow, that's so smart. You're like, I didn't even realize I did that, but thank you. I'm glad you loved it so much to give me a whole in-depth analysis.
You know, that reminds me of like back, I guess, college and school, where they ask you, what was the author's message? And then you have fans, or, you know, of your writing, and that they write, oh, you know, your message to me was like, in the story was beautiful and blah, blah. I'm like, message? What message? Well, he had blue curtains and I felt like you were expressing his inner, you know, whatever. I'm like, no, they're just blue curtains.
It certainly gives insight into all those literature classes you took where the literature professor was saying, you know, what was the meaning of the blue curtains? And as an author, you go, maybe they're just blue, you know?
Fucking blue.
There's the literature professor here, you guys.
I know.
I don't know, I feel like with all my lit classes, now I feel like I have to put meaning into things. So I'm like, okay, so there's curtains. The curtains have meaning to them? Oh, we'll just subtly offhand mention the curtain color to
And see if they
imply this
notice.
in the scene. All right, all the lit nerds are gonna go nuts over this. Moving on.
The anti-Chekhov's gun. Mention everything and none of it is important.
Or all of it was important.
Oh,
I
and
was sending a
terrific.
message out to the world.
Let's see. Oh, we got a new question. Exciting.
Yay.
How do you feel about being the creator of original work instead of a fan?
You mean being an author?
I suppose.
I know.
Like being the one to actually make the work instead of one who's just, yes, as an author, particularly at conventions.
Oh, yeah, I am an author, so I mean, I know that feeling, and I know that I don't know, I'm equally proud of my fan fiction, and yeah, a lot of times when people say, "Oh, you write fanfic," I'm like, "No, you don't understand what goes into that. That's equal to my books." You know, yes, my books, I did pay for a cover, and I did pay for an editor, and I did pay for whatever. And fan fiction, yes, I can just post it for free, but it doesn't mean it's any less. I feel just as proud of my fanfic, as, you know, sometimes in the wrong circles, I might go, you know, I write books, but I won't mention fan fiction. It just kind of depends on the group, I guess. But
I'm equally proud of both. I don't write much fan fiction anymore, and very little, and I think mainly just because I only wrote one fandom to begin with, and it began to feel kind of stifling. Just after you've written 125 fics in the same fandom, it's like, I'd like to play with some other people for a while. So for me, original fiction is a lot more open. I mean, I can do anything I want to, and I don't have to worry about staying true to somebody else's characters. So that's the big difference for me.
And there are two different types of writing, well, not types of writing, but I feel like they satisfy different needs. Like when I'm writing original fic, and like you, it's exploratory. You can go places with it. It's all yours to play with. It's that joy of invention and creation, and sometimes discovery when your characters surprise you. And then when you're writing fanfic, you're being part of this community where you're writing something where there's already other discussion and comment and other fic, and you're joining into this big ongoing conversation about these things. So it's writing for slightly different audiences, but I think slightly different purposes too. And they're both fantastic. Right? If I'm writing fanfic, I'm writing fanfic because I love Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes, and I'm going to go play with them for a while and squish them together.
Now kiss. Click, click.
As one does.
Now kiss.
And then if you're writing original, fic, I mean, some of that same impulse is there. I've just come up with these characters who I love, and I also want to squish them together. But it's something that I get to control a little bit more, but that's a different sort of joy and delight. And fanfic is another kind of joy and delight, and they're really similar, not quite the same, but you love them both.
Yep. So just quickly interrupting to say, so technically it's 10 o'clock and technically the panel's over, but there's nothing else going on tonight. So I guess if y'all have places to be, cool. If you'll want to stick around and talk about fan fiction a bit, we may stay here a little longer before we move over to the Discord. But yeah, time. It happens. Cool. I was going to say, right. Fanfic versus original fic and how that feels. So the way I kind of view it is they both have different purposes, but the same structure. Like, say you've got a sandbox. Original fiction is like you're building a sandcastle from scratch. And once you're done, you're waiting for people to pass by and go, wow, that's a neat sandcastle. You built something cool there. And maybe they'll be inspired to build their own sandcastle that may or may not be homage to yours. But the expectation is more that people are going to look at your sandcastle and go, wow, that's nice. Those shells you put on the top, nice. While fan fiction, it's more everyone's in this giant sandbox. Maybe there was an original big sandcastle, but everyone else is now just hanging out and building their sandcastles. And you march up with your little bucket and your little shovel, and you're like, want to build sandcastles? And you're like, everyone else is like, yeah, let's build some sandcastles. And maybe a bunch of you are working together on the same kind of sandcastle that has Steve Rogers sculpted on the front of the sandcastle. And it's beautiful with his muscles. Or maybe you're like, I'm gonna make my weird sandcastle that defies physics, and it's gonna have all these weird little details, and you'll have a couple other people going, that's a nice sandcastle. I like that rare pair of let me come up with one. Doctor Strange and Drax? Yes, good job. I don't know. I came up with that off the spot. Someone write this now. I need it. Thank you.
I haven't seen that one.
Good. I made the ship.
You made that one up. Let's go right for it.
Ship. We did it.
Woohoo! Let's go right for it.
So they're different methods of making your sandcastles, but you know, everyone's still having fun with creating, and they're just sandcastle methods with different expectations.
Yeah.
I hope that metaphor actually worked.
I don't know. I think that it seems like the readers feel like they can tell you more about what they expect or what they want when you're writing fan fiction. You know, when they're commenting back, well, write it this way, or I was disappointed you didn't end it that way. I think they feel like they can talk to you more. You know, when you're an author, yeah, they have to come find your Facebook page and stuff. But I feel like if you're on AO3, they'll just comment like whatever they feel like saying to you.
Yeah, especially if you're doing like a long fic with chapter by chapter updates, and they're like, I think this is going to lead to this. And you're like,
yes. Yeah.
Well, maybe it should lead to that.
And it was until you said that, and now it's not.
Well, and that's a good point, because the reading experience for most people for fan fiction is different from the reading experience of original fiction. I mean, if somebody reads a book, they sit down and read the book and it's been published. But if they're reading fan fiction, you know, they may be reading it chapter by chapter. Something may still even be in progress, and that's a very different,
That's a different thing too. Now, I have thought of this, and I don't know if you guys thought of it. Like, if you did a Patreon as an author and you released your fanfic, you know, chapter by chapter, what you're doing anyway, that's what I do. You know, have you thought about doing something like that? Like your fan fiction is a reward, or I don't know if you guys do Patreon. I don't, but I was just thinking about it.
I've heard of some authors who do that. It's not, since I'm not writing much fanfic anymore, it wouldn't make sense for me. But
I kind of tried that, in which I made a Patreon where I'd be like, hey, I'm going to do a short story for my original fiction every month. Basically, I'm going to write a fanfic of my own work every month.
Of your own work, yeah.
But no one enjoyed it. And I'm not sure if it was because people weren't interested in reading fanfic of the book they've already read, or if it's because it was 2020 and trying to launch a Patreon, and then
and nobody has money.
That might have just been a bad move on my part, but I have seen a couple other authors.
I think everybody was hungry and needing money. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen a number of other authors who are able to release chapter by chapter content on Patreon, and it works really well for them. So might be a market there. I don't know.
Like him, like I know people do it, but I've never
I don't know if
waded
I
into
could.
that. That's just, and I think I'm old enough too that I remember like the idea of publishing fanfic for profit makes me anxious. Like,
Yeah, that's true.
that's even if it's through
And
something
I don't think I could follow a monthly schedule of writing.
that
Anyway.
too.
I jump all over the place. So I'd be like, okay, I was writing on that book, but I'm working on something else. I think they get a little mad at me.
My fanfics go, they're updated once every couple of weeks, then every couple of months, then 2 years later.
A couple of
Hey,
years.
I finally got back to my fanfic, guys.
When I
I'm
wrote
afraid to
fanfic,
go back.
I wouldn't post until I had the whole story written. I mean, I'd
God,
post it one
couldn't do
chapter at a time, but I was afraid,
that.
which actually was a really good experience for me when I turned to original fic, because I don't start one story until I finish the one before. I don't go back and edit until I finish the whole thing. So it was good for my own self-discipline.
Oh, so looking at the chat, it sounds like we do technically have to wrap up soon, even if there isn't anything afterwards for sake of the recording, because that's right, we are being recorded. I forgot. I was just happy talking. So I guess we are going to have to hop over to the Discord if anyone else wants to continue chatting about fan fiction. I will go ahead and post the link again for anyone who might have missed it earlier. But it was so wonderful talking to all of you about fan fiction. This has been utterly delightful. And now I'm gonna have dinner and then get back to writing some of my own fanfic.
Well, I'm gonna say goodnight, guys. I'm not gonna join you on Discord. I gotta get to bed. But it was fun.
I am also going to go and have dinner, but thanks to Dorian for fantastic moderating.
Dorian, you've got to do the reading of that. They should just record that, and every time they use that, because that was awesome. Absolutely awesome reading.
Thanks. If people want me to record that, I totally will. Mods, just let me know.
Like, you made it entertaining.
Thanks, you guys. It's family movie night, so I'm off to watch
All right.
the family. So good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.